Hi, my name is Luis, and my section focuses on identifying common types of difficult coworkers and how their behavior affects the workplace. When people talk about difficult coworkers, they're not just talking about people that we personally dislike. Difficult coworkers are individuals whose behavior disrupts communication, lowers morale, and makes teamwork harder. Research shows that these behaviors often follow recognizable patterns, which in return makes them easier to understand and manage. One common type is the aggressive or hostile coworker. This person may raise their voice, interrupt others, and respond defensively to feedback. Workplace research shows that this behavior often comes from stress or feeling the lack of control. Even if it's not intentional, it can create an environment where others are uncomfortable speaking up. Another type is a passive aggressive coworker. This person avoids direct confrontation but shows resistance through sarcasm, missed deadlines, or negative attitudes. According to communication research, this behavior usually happens when someone feels unheard or frustrated. Passive aggressive behavior is difficult because the conflict is indirect, yet it still damages trust within the team. The third type is the know it all coworker. This individual frequently dismisses others' ideas, talks over teammates, and insists that their way is the only correct option. Psychology based workplace studies suggest that this behavior often comes from the desire of validation or status. While confidence can be helpful, constant dominance discourages collaboration and limits groups' input. Another common difficult coworker is the slacker or the disengaged coworker. This person does the bare minimum, misses deadlines, or relies on others to pick up their work. Research shows that this often leads to resentment, uneven workloads, and burnout among team members who feel forced to compensate. Finally, there's the micromanager. This coworker closely controls how others complete their tasks and struggles to trust teammates. Although micromanagement often comes from the fear of failure, it can make coworkers feel undervalued, stressed, and lowering motivation and productivity. Understanding these different types of difficult coworkers is important because it helps the team focus on behaviors rather than personalities. Recognizing these patterns allows coworkers to professionally respond instead of emotionally, which sets the foundation to effective conflict management strategies. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. My name is Michael Kuhlen. We just heard a lot about the different types of difficult coworkers that you might run into: aggressive, passive aggressive, micromanagers, things like that. Um, Now, I want to talk about the causes behind those difficulties, because understanding why these behaviors happen is really the only way to effectively deal with these coworkers in the professional setting. So I'll be covering common causes of difficulties with coworkers. We'll also address a few key questions. What triggers difficult behavior? Is it intentional or situational? And how does the work environment that we're in contribute? So first, I want to break down the main causes. One of the biggest culprits is stress and burnout. And I don't think that's really a surprise to anybody. If you're watching, raise your hand if you've dealt with burnout at work. I can't really see any of you, but I'm pretty sure we're all holding our hands up. So, when employees are overloaded with deadlines, long hours, or lack of support, it can often lead to irritability, being withdrawn, or lashing out at other coworkers. For example, a coworker might snap during a team meeting, not because they're inherently mean or don't like the other person, but just because they're exhausted from juggling too many tasks at the same time. Research shows that workplace stressors like these are directly linked to workplace confrontation and burnout. And that ends up creating a cycle where one person's stress affects the whole team and everybody just gets more and more stressed. So, Personality differences are another key cause. We know that not everybody meshes perfectly. Introverts will clash with extroverts, extroverts will clash with other extroverts. Some people need constant validation to know that they're on the right track, but that can rub other people the wrong way. So often, traits like overconfidence or a rigid rule following type mindset might lead to toxic behaviors. Narcissism, in particular, is a common descriptor for difficult employees. Sometimes it'll show up as entitlement or a lack of empathy, which will disrupt teamwork. So, poor communication skills can also escalate things. Back in chapter 5, we talked about how if somebody struggles to express needs clearly, it'll lead to misunderstandings and frustration. And that's no different with our coworkers. So, we also see things like power struggles arise when hierarchies aren't defined, either in job roles or in a group setting. It'll cause competition and confusion. So, unclear roles will mean that people will step on each other's toes during work tasks, and it ultimately will breed resentment. And finally, workplace culture. If an environment breeds toxicity through any of these other things that we've talked about, it'll normalize that difficult behavior among coworkers. So, finally, let's address those three questions we talked about earlier. What triggers difficult behavior? Frankly, common triggers might include high pressure situations, tight or changing deadlines, criticism, or even stressors from a personal life spilling over into work life. So, can we identify if the behavior is intentional or situational? Well, it could be both. Intentional is more like if the difficult behavior is driven by something like malice or ego, though. But often these are actually situational behaviors. They stem from temporary stress or poor work environment. Research on toxic workers shows many are overconfident rule breakers, and it makes it feel deliberate, but the context matters really. And finally, how does the work environment contribute? Well, often immensely. Factors like leadership deficiencies or power hierarchies, unprofessional norms can all amplify issues that we experience with our coworkers. It can turn a minor annoyance into a major conflict. Uh, as Keaton and Beck noted in the book, the use of power is central to all types of conflict among group members, and that doesn't change in a coworker dynamic. So unclear group roles or power dynamics in teams will often fuel interpersonal problems and it'll hinder effective communication. So, in summary, difficult coworker behavior isn't likely random. It's often rooted in some kind of stress or a personality conflict, a communication barrier or gap, or some kind of power issue or role confusion, or even just the workplace culture in general. So by recognizing these, we can approach those conflicts with a goal of understanding the root cause of the problem. And that hopefully allows us to more effectively manage those conflicts as we come across them. So we can definitely recognize problem coworkers. And now we know what's often behind those problems. And next, you're going to hear about how best to handle interactions with those coworkers. Thank you.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Julius Burnside, and my group decided to split the tasks up into four different roles. Mine is going to be strategies for handling different types of difficult coworkers. And personally, in my opinion, I think that there's many different ways that you can actually handle a difficult coworker. And I concentrated on the role of effective communication in team environments. In communicating in groups and teams, from the textbook that I was reading, which is obviously what our class is reading, it was saying that conflict is usually just a natural part of group work, but the main factor is how you actually go about that after the conflict, and its impact depends on more so how it's handled rather than like the actual moment. So, I mean, if you handle it well, it'll go well. If you don't handle it well, it's not going to go well. Simple as that. And there's many productive approaches inside communicating assertively. There's establishing clear boundaries and addressing problems early instead of just ignoring them was another thing from the textbook that really stuck out to me because it's definitely true. If you're just letting someone get away with this stuff all the time, it's just gonna build up and build up and build up over time. So, in the textbook as well, it also highlights the importance of being professional. And this is meaning to keep discussion centered on tasks rather than behaviors and criticizing the other person because there's no way to gain anything from going about like that. So if you're just criticizing a person and talking about their behavior, it's just going to make everything way worse. I've done some research as well from organizations, such as Harvard Business Review and the Society for Human Resource Management, and they reinforce these points, emphasizing documentation and recognizing when it is appropriate to involve these type of things like management and HR. And ultimately, successfully dealing with difficult coworkers depends on the type of communication and the type of emotional self-control because it can go both ways, and you got to prioritize team objectives over just personal agreements. So yeah, that's my opinion on it. But in addition to all this, there's definitely more things that you can do. Effective conflict management also requires active listening and perspective taking. You got to look at things from the other person's perspective, or else it's not going to help anything out. And all this stuff helps reduce misunderstandings and people getting defensive. Leaders and team members who seek to understand, the underlying interests rather than just surface disagreements are more likely to reach constructive outcomes and probably more likely in general to become more fond of each other and maybe even friends. You never know. But yeah, research from the organizations that I was talking about before, like Harvard and the Society for Human Resource Management, also further emphasize these rules as well and these values of documenting ongoing issues, using feedback channels appropriately, recognizing when informal resolution is no longer effective. That was one of the main things it was talking about in these sources. But overall, successfully handling difficult coworkers just involves clear communication, emotional regulation, mutual respect, and using feedback channels appropriately, recognizing when informal resolution is no longer effective. That was one of the main things it was talking about in these sources. But overall, successfully handling difficult coworkers just involves clear communication, emotional regulation, mutual respect, and just listening to the other person. You gotta be able to hear people out and take a step in their shoes, perceive things from their point of view, and if you end up getting mad at them, you gotta take a second and think who's in the right, who's in the wrong. Is it, our fault, my fault, their fault, both our faults?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammad Habib, and today I'm going to be tackling how to deal with difficult coworkers. And the aspect that I'm going to be focusing on is what outcomes and consequences result in such behaviors from having difficult coworkers with you at the workplace. So one of the first thing that I see when always dealing with difficult coworkers is it has a negative impact on the team because it creates tension and conflict within the team. There's not going to be any more trust. It damages trust and teamwork. It leads to poor communication and misunderstanding. And overall, it lowers the team morale and motivation. Uh, this is happens because like when there's no understanding between coworkers and there's difficulty between them too, it's also going to negatively impact the customer service aspect and the company's reputation as a whole. Uh, what what happens when you have difficult coworkers at your place or difficulty handling those coworkers? It's going to affect productivity, stress. It's going to affect the mental health, and honestly, it's going to lead a lot of people to either not come to work or just straight out leave because they don't want to deal with such things. It slows down the work due to conflict and distractions, increase mistakes and reworks because people are not understanding each other and they're not willing to work with each other. And it can lead to an anxiety, frustration, and depression. And if that were to happen, then people feel like they're not valued at their job. And the next best thing for them is just to quit or just try to go to a different department if that's a way they can get out of that situation. What happens when difficult behavior is ignored? Let's say your managers are not talking about it, the coworkers themselves are not talking about it. That's gonna just create more conflict within the team. People are not gonna be talking to each other. There's gonna be that tension going on between the coworkers who are having the difficulty between them and the employees who are like working and trying to solve those issues. They might come to like a halt and be like, okay, what's like there's no way to deal with it, so I'm just gonna ignore it, which is just gonna make the problem even harder to deal with, and it's gonna create a toxic culture because like everybody's just focusing on themselves, they're not willing to talk about it, and that's not gonna be a great place to be at. And the opposite side of that is what happens when that conflict is addressed effectively and people are actually talking about it. It's going to improve communication and mutual respect. It's just going to make the team stronger and there's better collaboration between the team, higher employee morale and engagement. It's going to affect obviously the overall team work and how they get it do. And it's going to reduce stress and make it to where it's a healthier work environment and it's going to increase productivity and performance. And obviously, employees want to feel safe and valued at their jobs because that's the whole thing. If they don't feel valued and or safe, then there's no reason for them to stay at that job. And one of my last bullets in here is why is it important for organization to manage coworker conflict? Just so they can maintain a positive work culture. It protects employees' mental health and well-being. It improves overall morale and it reduces turnover costs, encourage accountability and respect behavior, and it helps the team focus on goals and instead of conflict. So these are just some key points that I pointed out when it comes to dealing with difficult coworkers. I focused on the outcomes, consequences that it comes from such behaviors, and overall, if the work itself doesn't ask questions or doesn't deal with it, then it's just going to make the conflict even bigger. And most jobs, they don't want to do that. They want to deal with it right away. So they maintain a healthy relation with all the employees. And obviously, that is just going to negatively impact the company itself because it will show like when there's a conflict, customers will be able to tell, and it's just not going to be a nice environment. So that's all I had to say on this presentation. Thank you for joining me.